Hello and welcome to the Skeptical Experience, a weekly radio show discussing, debating, conjugating, disseminating and maybe even full-blown arguing about anomalous beliefs and scepticism, from gods to ghosts, haunting to homeopathy, witches to general woo-woo. This week's guest is Professor Chris French, creator of Goldsmiths' own Anomalistic Psychology Research Unit, regular on TV and radio. He's a writer, editor of The Skeptic magazine, occasional columnist for The Guardian, and most known to most of us as the guy at the end of Most Haunted Who Made Sense. Hello, Chris. Hello. Okay.
Just have to do a quick correction there, Richard. I never actually appeared on Most Haunted.
Oh, haven't you? Which one was it?
Ours was called Haunted Homes.
Oh, yes.
And
I get them mixed
basically, we never actually faked anything, so nothing ever happened, so we didn't get a third series.
Oh, well, yes. I can't think why that would be. You're suggesting they fake things on those sites?
Oh, certainly not on Haunted Homes, I'd hasten to add. I couldn't possibly comment on Most Haunted.
No, of course not. Oh, dear. Right, you are expecting a grandchild?
Yes, today is the due date. I've checked the statistics, and according to one website, I believe that less than 5% of women actually deliver on their due date. So I'm hoping we don't get interrupted and I don't have to whip my daughter off to the maternity ward halfway through.
How rational a world do you think your grandchild will be born into?
I think the basic kind of level of rationality probably hasn't changed enormously over the last few hundred years. I think there's a kind of general assumption that, particularly among skeptics maybe, that we are looking at kind of paranormal beliefs and other kind of associated weird beliefs, and that these are some kind of deviation from a rational norm. Now, in fact, I don't think the norm is that rational. I think these cognitive biases that we have that make us all intuitively quite irrational, I think they're there throughout. And basically, I think it's as interesting to talk about the psychology of skepticism as it is to talk about the psychology of belief.
Right. So, what is the focus then, leading from the psychology of skepticism, of your Anomalistic Psychology Research Unit? Tell me a bit about it.
Okay. Anomalistic psychology is mainly focused on trying to come up with and test non-paranormal explanations for ostensibly paranormal experiences. So the working hypothesis is that paranormal forces don't exist. So can we explain all these weird things that people report, whether we're talking about UFOs or ghosts or telepathy or all those other kind of things that people are so interested in, can we explain them without having to invoke paranormal forces? And the kinds of things that we look at are cognitive biases that might lead people to draw the wrong conclusion, to interpret an experience or a situation in a way where they are convinced that something paranormal's happened, but maybe we could show that in fact it didn't. And things like memory biases and false memories and hallucinations and all these other whole very wide range of different factors, but to try and look at those systematically as they apply to attempting to explain these experiences. And I also think it's very important that we have to produce evidence. It's not just the people who believe in the paranormal who have the burden of proof. If we're saying, no, we don't think that these experiences are anything to do with visitation by spirits, we think it's sleep paralysis, we have to produce evidence that supports our account of things as well.
Okay. You're very interested in this whole area of skepticism. What do you say, from what you just said, what do you say to people who say skeptics are closed-minded? That's a closed-minded philosophy.
That's one of the kind of statements that really annoys me, because the one thing about true skepticism, and I think we do need to be careful here that there are lots of people who might label themselves as skeptics who have got a basic attitude that, well, basically it's all rubbish, isn't it? And that's as far as it goes, and they don't think you need to look at the evidence or think about it any further. I don't think of that as being my version of scepticism. Scepticism is about saying, show me the evidence, convince me, and being open to a very wide range of possibilities, but always, before you accept any particular claim, being keen, and a particularly controversial claim, being keen to see how good the evidence is, and to critically assess that evidence. Now, part of that, and one of the major criticisms that skeptics make of pseudo-scientists is that very often the claims that are being put forward are non-falsifiable. So in which case, I think it's very important that skeptics live by that rule as well. We have to be able to say what would convince us that telepathy really did exist, what would convince us that psychokinesis really did exist, that UFOs really did exist. Now, typically, you'll find that people who follow this kind of version of skepticism that I would advocate, they will be able to tell you that. Yes. It won't be a situation where they say, I just know I'm right. Now, interestingly, the people who often accuse skeptics of being closed-minded are precisely people who could never be convinced they're wrong. The obvious example here would be any kind of religious fundamentalist. If you were to say to any kind of religious fundamentalist, is there anything that could happen that would persuade you that your faith is misguided, that what you believe isn't true? They'll usually say, often with great satisfaction, no. They know in their hearts it's true. Now, again, that's just completely the antithesis of a sceptical approach, and I'd say even of a scientific approach. What we're about is, well, show us the evidence, convince us that it's true. If the evidence is in favour of the hypothesis, then for the time being we'll accept it. And that's the other thing about science, that it's never about absolute truth. It's about trying to move towards truth, but always accepting that any answers that we've got are just the best answers we have on the basis of the currently available evidence, and that may change as new evidence comes in.
So it's burden of proof.
Absolutely, yeah.
And meeting that burden of proof.
Yeah.
What is the line of burden of proof to you? When in the process would you say, actually, there's really something in this?
Well, again, as I say, I'd never have a position where I said that I knew with absolute certainty that hypothesis X was either definitely right or definitely wrong. I think that the weight of evidence can sometimes be overwhelmingly in favour of one hypothesis or another. Sometimes you'll hear skeptics saying, and I say these are the kind of fairly ignorant, uninformed skeptics, there's no evidence at all in favour of ESP to support the existence of ESP. Well, that's just wrong. There is lots of evidence. The question is about the quality of the evidence and whether or not we should find it convincing, and what are the problems with the evidence, what are the strengths of it. But to just say there's none is rubbish. Now, when it comes to what would actually convince me that I was wrong, again, it's the same thing. I'd never get to a point where I said, oh, well, I now definitely know that ESP really does exist. But if I could find a replicable phenomenon which, under well-controlled conditions, again, we're not talking about 100% replicability. Science doesn't work like that, particularly social sciences. But if we could find some kind of reasonably replicable phenomenon that independent scientists could produce in their own laboratories, and that would go a long way to convincing me that, hey, maybe telepathy really does exist. Sometimes these claims are made, and over the years we have put a lot of time into actually testing these claims directly, and to date I've never produced any evidence that I found compelling that paranormal forces really do exist. And I have tried. I have put a lot of time into this.
What do you on that say to these people who either will not or go on the James Randi $1 million test, or have been on it and say that in some way it was wrong, or the energies were wrong in the room, or any other excuse?
Well, again, I think most listeners will know about James Randi's $1 million challenge, but just in case there's anybody out there that doesn't, James Randi has on offer $1 million for anyone who can prove under well-controlled conditions that they have psychic abilities. I think I'm right in saying that relatively recently, the challenge was changed so it now can't be anyone. It has to be someone who already has an established media profile. Right. But you'd have still thought there are lots and lots of psychics out there who claim they can work these miracles. Why aren't they queuing up to demonstrate this to Randi and get the $1 million? a lot of them come up with reasons like, you can't use this gift for profit, for personal profit. Well, don't. Give it to charity. A lot of really worthy causes out there, you know. But another objection that you hear is that people say, well, the whole thing's a fix. Randi would never actually part with the money, or the money's not there. The money is there, it's not a fix. But for anybody who genuinely believes that it is, my advice would be, go for the challenge anyway. And then there's only two possibilities. If you genuinely got these amazing powers and you can demonstrate them under controlled conditions, either you will pass the test and you will get the money, or you can reveal to the world that the whole thing was a setup and it was fixed, and that Randi had actually set the whole thing up so that you couldn't possibly win, and his reputation will be in tatters. Now, I know from working with James Randi and in actually carrying out the preliminary tests, because Randi insists, I think not unreasonably, that before you can go for the formal $1 million challenge, you first have to pass a preliminary test carried out by someone that he knows and trusts. And we have actually carried out various tests in terms of that preliminary challenge. Nobody ever gets past the preliminary challenge stage, because if the test is properly carried out, it's highly unlikely that they will. But I can guarantee that the amount of effort and time that goes into setting up those tests to ensure two things: one, that they are properly controlled, and two, that the person being tested believes and knows that the test is a fair test. There is absolutely no point at all in testing a psychic claimant who says from the outset, well, I just can't do this task, or I can't do it under these conditions. So what you have to do is work very hard to come up with a protocol that the claimant is happy with. They have to sign a statement before the test begins saying that the test is fair, that they think they will pass the test, and so on. And we really do bend over backwards, and by we there I mean not just me and my colleagues at the APRU, but James Randi and his colleagues work very, very hard to ensure that that is the case. And then what typically happens is that the claimant will fail the test, and then retrospectively they'll decide that actually the test wasn't fair at all for reasons X, Y and Z. And clearly it's then just a matter of kind of rationalising it away. Typically it doesn't dent their own faith in their own abilities, because typically most of the people who would put themselves forward for this kind of test, they genuinely believe they have a gift. There are con artists out there, but those con artists wouldn't put themselves forward for a test like this, because they know that, particularly somebody like James Randi, they're not going to fool him. He knows all the tricks of the trade.
Yes, I'm just going to say to the other room, since no one can hear us, that everyone's getting a error, page not working, or page down for maintenance on the wired radio. So you're probably going to be listening to this on the podcast later. If it comes up, then great. Okay, we'll carry on.
Even if we're not live.